And in 1942, later on, in June, I went aboard a ship, but it was a freight ship for personnel, carried a lot of people. I understand there was from 800 to 1,000 soldiers.
Wow.
On the ship. It's called it's a Liberty ship. We got that from the Merchant Marines. They had all the Liberty ships. And they were mixed between cargo, personnel, and 2 small cannons. Because the war was very, very difficult, crossing the ocean to get our ships into Europe.
Now, was there a threat from like the Germans and stuff on the way over to Europe? Were they always like kind of lurking in the ocean then, like with the submarines and everything?
The Germans had warships all over the place. And the Germans had U-boats. Thousands of U-boats all over the Atlantic Ocean.
Wow.
And they sunk everything that was sailing, including many American freighters, warships, destroyers. They destroyed it a lot. They kept us from helping England more, and Russia. Russia was our ally.
So where did you sail to, or where did they have you be based out of once you got over to?
My ship went straight to Morocco, which Morocco City, Casablanca, if you look at the map, I'll show you a map pretty soon, is on the Atlantic Ocean side instead of the Mediterranean side. There's a narrow passage going from the Atlantic Ocean into the Mediterranean, which goes to Italy. So we basically could stop in Morocco because they were free of the German control. The Free French army was fighting the Germans in North Africa. 1942, all the way until June when I went there, and right to the end of 42, I was there in the Pacific, in the Mediterranean, and in the Mediterranean, we had our first landings, and well, it wasn't even combat because the local troops cleaned up some of the Germans in the north of Africa. That's called North Africa. My ship would take American troops into Italy, fighting the Italians during World War II.
Yeah.
Italy was one of their main allies to Germany. Hitler, the leader in Germany, and Mussolini, the leader in Italy, were good friends.
Mm.
That's what I've been told. I was 15, 1-5. Maybe you have a son 15, or you have a son. What do you expect from a boy 15? But I was so patriotic. And my mother had passed away when I was only 11 years old. So I was almost like a delinquent in the city where I lived, Garfield, New Jersey. And we had a very good friend who was a midwife. If any one of you are the age of midwives, we had no doctors in the hospitals to take babies, too many babies coming. And we had midwives. It was a good nurse who knew all about giving birth. and she's the one who gave me birth, and she's the one who gave me a baptism paper, which is from the church, because she didn't even take us kids, the newborns, to a hospital, and she didn't take us to the church, of course. We were too young, just born. But she filled the certificate and said, I was born in 1925 instead of 1927, which makes me 15 years old when I went in. I was supposed to be 17, minimum age for joining the Navy. And that was called a minority cruise. So I went on a minority cruise, which durates 4 years. And that took me through the whole World War II. And I was over there for 2 full years in the combat areas, taking soldiers.
So where did you go after Italy then? Were you always in Italy or going elsewhere after Italy?
Oh no, we never went north of Italy.
Never went north of Italy. So you were in the
The
Mediterranean.
Germans were too strong. They had already captured France.
Got it.
They had already captured all the small countries, Belgium, Spain and Portugal were free. They did not join the militaries. But all the other little countries, Finland, Norway, all the little countries on that coast between England and Europe were captured by the Germans. They ruled Europe for a few years before the Americans got involved.
Papai, where did you go after you left the Mediterranean?
Was that where you served?
I went no place.
You just served the
I
whole...
went to Brazil, yes, but that's too soon yet. I'm still telling you the story about the Mediterranean. And what we did was go and pick up troops in Tunisia. Now, Tunisia is a country closest to Italy in the Mediterranean, but it's North Africa. And Tunisia was full of Germans and Rommel's army. Rommel was the head of the German troops and military in North Africa. His name was Rommel, R-O-M-M-E-L. And he gave us more trouble than any other person could have given us. He was a very astute general for the Germans in North Africa. He practically lived in the deserts, and his troops did too. The Germans was a very difficult opponent in the war. And every time we made a trip into Italy, the Germans and Italians were defending that area, and they were bombing or trying to bomb our ships, who brought troops, ammunition, cannons, and war material to make the invasion of Italy. And we made many trips back and forth from North Africa countries, Tunisia, Algeria, and Syria. Those 3 countries were fighting the Germans to get them out of there, but Tunisia was the toughest because it was so close to Italy. The city of Rome or Anzio, beachhead which was a beachhead for us, and was so close to Tunisia rather than Liberia or Algeria. But they were now on the side of United States because their own troops went against the Germans and the Americans went against the Germans. Local troops were joining the Americans.
To tip the balance away from the Germans and the Italians in the end.
Exactly.
What was it? What do you think of what was like? Was there a key turning point there that helped to, when you were there to start turning the tide? Then, because it sounds like, you were just like really fighting like hard, but like just trying.
Well, I was there early. 1942 was really the beginning of the war in Italy.
Yeah.
With and the beginning of the Americans getting over there. I was early. That's why my ship was dedicated to the North African countries, helping them to fight the Italians and the Germans. And we went back and forth, picking up their troops and our troops. And then later on, 43, 44, in 43 and 44, we began getting stronger and stronger in that area. We sent several aircraft carriers to the beginning of the Mediterranean Sea. But the Germans controlled the Mediterranean Sea with their bombing aircraft, and their dive bombers were very accurate, and they sunk many of our ships in the Mediterranean. But once United States, I was there in 42, 43, 44.
44.
I was there at the end of 44, near the end of 44. So from 42 to 44, I was in the Mediterranean area, North Africa.
Wow.
Of course, I was dedicated to small boat landings. I was trained for small boats, and the men, the soldiers, had to come off the ship in the rope ladders, and they climbed down into my boat. I have a picture. One picture's worth 1,000 words. Driver of the boat, but they don't call him driver. No, I was the coxswain, which means he's the driver of the small boat. And I handled the ramp with a lever, but I had 3 men as my crew. And these guys were the toughest guys, American and the North Africans. Went right into the beach, many of them losing arms, legs, heads, falling in the beach.
How many people fit in the boat?
The boat, we had anywhere from 20 to 25, depending if they had a Jeep. Sometimes I could carry a Jeep with a machine gun on it, and 3 or 4 soldiers would be dedicated to the Jeep, and the rest of them with hand rifles. All of them had hand rifles, mostly from United States, the M16.
Were you treated differently because you were 15?
No, as a matter of fact, I have 2 honorable discharges. One for the time in World War II, and one for the time in Korea. So they never questioned my age. I used my certificate, which the midwife wrote and certified that I was 17, and the Navy accepted that. And the Navy used me as a regular sailor. So I was a regular sailor, and I trained for the landing craft because I wanted to be I wanted to be a Marine, but I couldn't be a Marine. I was too small. I'm a little short guy, and the Marines would not take me. They sent me to the Navy in the beginning of the war, and I joined the Navy.
And what was life like aboard ship then?
It was full of soldiers, and I was only to deal with my boat, to make sure my boat would make the landings. And the soldiers had to climb down the rope ladders on the side of the ship and get into my boat. Once we were satisfied that they were all there, because there were officers on top of the boat telling them who and where, who would get into my boat. Or many boats. My ship carried about 15 to 20 landing boats.
Wow.
Always full of soldiers going over there, doing the battles, and then we go back empty. Sometimes the medics on the beach would pick up somebody who lost an arm, a leg, and have us take him back to the ship. And we had a side entrance. We would go to the side entrance, and the medics would take these wounded soldiers into the ship, where we had 1 or 2 or 3 medics. I don't know the details. I was too young anyway. I wasn't interested in what was happening in the war. I was only interested in doing my job. They told me what to do. And at 15 years old, when you're that old or young, you do what you're told to do. And that's what I was doing. And I was so good at handling the boat. It surprised me. Dropping the ramp only when you knew that the ramp would hit sand and not hit deep water. Because if I would hit deep water, the soldiers would just run off that ramp and sink. They all had heavy packs of guns, ammunition, hand grenades. They had all kind of material. And therefore, it was very difficult for me to pay attention, to make sure, looking, as you saw that picture, looking over the heads of these poor guys and looking at the beach that I had to land and being very, very careful of the waves. It's like if you've ever been swimming on the ocean, you know that every 7th wave is a big one.
Yeah.
And I would get my boat and go right behind the 7th wave. And as the wave was going in, I would speed up with the wave and come down with the wave and go on to the sand. But I learned that in training. My main concern, and well, I wasn't even concerned because I was too young to be concerned. I was doing my job, and I was doing what I was told to do, exactly. However, I could hear the bombs going over my head, whistling, going after my big ship. They were not trying to drop a bomb on our little boats, although that was the machine gunners who were on the beach keeping us from getting onto the beach. The German and Italian machine gunners.
Wow.
They were always shooting at the boats, and the cannons were shooting at the big ships, because besides our cargo ships and personnel ships, we had American destroyers and small battleships, but not battleships because they were too big. We went as far as having what they call cruisers. Cruisers.
And it was
the
easier for them to
cruisers-
get up and down like the
The
Mediterranean.
cruisers join us before the landing and bomb whoever was on the beach trying to protect that beach, the Germans or the Italians.
Got it.
So it was the cruisers that came, and they had missiles, they had cannons,
Wow.
they had everything shooting at the beach to clear the beach so we could land the soldiers. And we would hear the shooting from our ships over our heads into the beach, and from the beach over our heads to our ships. And that was not, I prayed a lot, but I was too young to understand what death means. And I was not scared to die. I just went and did my job facing the problems that we had to face against the Germans and Italians.
Did you have any friends from the ship that passed away, that died in war?
Must have.
Well, sometimes we would have one of the boats, because we had to meet in a rendezvous. We got off our ship filled with soldiers, and we had to meet in a rendezvous. And this rendezvous had about 8 or 10 ships, boats. And 1 or 2 or 3 of the boats would always capsize or be hit with a missile. And those were the friends, but nothing personal. In the Navy, right then and there, you could not have a personal friend. We would go, we would eat together in the mess hall. We called it a mess hall, and we would eat together. And I knew the names of many, and yes, we had some people that were killed. And there were also some that were driving the boats were killed.
Wow.
The machine gunners on the beach would aim at the boats.
Yeah.
And my ramp was in front of me, made of steel. These boats were made by a company who built thousands of them for the invasions. And they were the boats that mainly made the main invasion in Normandy. I did not go to Normandy. I was concentrated in the Mediterranean and Italy. But the
It was
Normandy,
the same type of boat.
the Normandy had all these little landing boats going in there, thousands of them, and thousands of hundreds of our boats were sunk in Normandy, and in Italy, a few each time. I must have made 15 or 20 trips back and forth to pick up more soldiers, put them in my boat, get my boat to the beach, and they would go into the beach and fight the Germans or Italians. And sometimes Germans and Italians were together. Well, there were so many beaches. We
So it was
were
just all
open
over the
to,
place.
and the troops we were carrying were 50% of them were from the local North African countries.
Wow.
And they must have given the information to our officers on the ship, who said you go straight on this compass. So whatever the compass was red, we went directly into that area. Some of them, one of them important was Salerno. It's a city in Italy in the south called Salerno, and they had a rough beach, and that was one of the places I went many times. and the other one was Anzio, A-N-Z-I-O, Anzio. And Anzio was our main entrance to Rome.
So that was the way to get to Rome then.
That was a way to get to Rome.
What was the news like when you found that you were going to be going home then, when you got to the end of your tour there?
I just thank God that I was going to go home, and then from home they said, you go to South America and get on to a PT boat, which was converted for submarine war duty. The Germans sent a lot of U-boats, they called them, U-boat, to Argentina for fuel, because Argentina was one of the few countries in South America that did not join the war. They were neutral. That's the boat. That's the PT boat I joined when they sent me to Rio in these Liberty ships were smaller than the regular cargo ship.
Did you go to Brazil?
I went to Brazil in 44. They brought me home. In home, they said, you're going to go and look for submarines along the Atlantic East Coast. All the countries. United States was bombed by German U-boats, and United States lost several of our big ships on the coast of the USA.
So the U-boats got pretty close, and
Oh, the U-boats got pretty close to us because you couldn't detect them. They were smaller than a regular submarine. And the Germans had so many of them. In one occasion, I heard that the British and the Americans sunk 750 U-boats of the Germans, and they had many more.
even after sinking
That
seven.
was up in the North Atlantic. The Atlantic Ocean was dangerously occupied by the German U-boats. They did more damage than anything.
Didn't you tell me that they were off the coast of New York City?
In Long Island, the people actually had a landing by a U-boat who had either food or fuel. And why did they land? But they were not armed to kill American citizens who lived on Long Island. They just went there because they had no other way to stay in the ocean with a small U-boat. And I guess there's a movie saying the Russians are landing. No, it was the Germans who landed in Long Island. And they actually ate with some of the families, invited the German troops who were hungry. And they fed them, and our troops were not available, and we couldn't fight. That was what I...
How did it get to be that the Americans were feeding the Germans if they were...
enemy.
Right, yeah.
Well...
Did the families just not know any better?
A sick person, a person who's hungry...
Humanity.
You have sympathy, and through their sympathy, they fed them. That's what I heard through the grapevine. I mean, I wasn't there, but I heard that. So United States was also harassed by German U-boats. And that went all the way south to Argentina, including Brazil. And the small countries on the way to Brazil lost many ships to the German
'Cause the
U-boats.
U-boats-
One of the big ships they sank in Brazil was a cruiser, which the Americans gave to Brazil as a gift for war. And the cruiser was sunk by a U-boat. And when we got there, of course, there was just a few of us. I was one of them on this PT boat, which was converted. They took the torpedoes off because these PT boats had torpedoes for going in and bombing German ships or bombing Japanese ships. That's where we used most of them.
So
in
the PT
Japan,
boat,
in
the
the
PT boats were more
Pacific.
Japan, and
Yes.
that was where they were used more.
Right, and that's where we used most of the PT boats in the Pacific Ocean. However, my boat was converted and it was called a PT crash boat. We were also going to pick up survivors in war airplanes that would crash in the South Atlantic. And we were so fast. A PT boat could go up to 50 knots per hour, which is a little more than 50 miles per hour.
So it almost could go on a highway at like regular speed, like a car out on the highway. Close
Yes,
to.
exactly. We had depth charges instead of torpedoes. And our depth charges would be rolled off the back of the boat. I call it a boat because it's a PT boat. And the captain was always an officer, never a regular sailor. He was an officer of the Navy. And he was trained for the PT boat and for dropping tin cans. The depth charge looked like a tin can. He had two gunner's mates that would time it, the depth that it would explode. And we would go very fast, and the tin can, the depth charge would go down so many feet and explode, blow up the U-boat. Would crack the seams, and
Sink it.
those
Wow.
guys were dead,
Wow.
the whole bunch of them.
Wow.
So U-boat was not a good place to be. I did that for a year.
Did it for a year until the end of the
And
war.
the best thing about that in Brazil was that my boat was stationed in Rio de Janeiro at the only airport at the time was a small military airport right in the center of Rio de Janeiro. And I met my brother-in-law, who was a musician, a pianist, and he was once a pianist for the president of Brazil. He was such a concert pianist. And I met him at a USO, which is a private organization made for the benefit of veterans. You go into the USO club and you had free drinks, you had dancing, you had everything. And it was called USO. And they also sent very popular people in the USO to entertain the troops wherever they went, the veterans wherever they went. And I saw, wasn't Marilyn Monroe, I saw one of the famous actresses in those days, what was her name? I forget her name. But, and we also had all kind of entertainment by the USO. So And what happened? I met this pianist because I was a young boy and I could speak a little bit Italian, which was a little bit of Portuguese. And he liked it, and I sat with him at the piano and talked to him with a drink. And because I was already 17, 18 years old when I met him. And he took me to his family home where I met my wife, who I was married to for 70 years. She was a beautiful Brazilian young girl, sister to this pianist, and I met her, and I have her picture all over the place. When the war was over, the Navy sent me and my wife back to the United States, where I was discharged and lived for a couple of years learning what I didn't learn in school, because I left school when I was 15. That's like the first year of high school. I didn't finish high school before the Navy, no, not even Korea. I finished high school at night, and then I went and I said, after working when we came back to the United States, my wife and I, we lived here, and I was learning everything I could. I went to school under the GI Bill.
Got it.
For refrigeration service. All that I'm telling you is history.